So last Thursday, every Thursday, the weekly unemployment claims number is released, and so the story is actually would have came out last Thursday, but just had time to cover it now. And apparently, apparently, for the first week in 4 months. So let me just read from this Wall Street Journal. This is reported in the Wall Street Journal. We have a rise in weekly unemployment claims points to faltering jobs recovery. Initial claims climb for the first time in nearly 4 months to 1.4 million amid uptick in coronavirus cases. So let me just quickly read from this article from the Wall Street Journal, wallstreetjournal.com. It's by Eric Morath, and it was published on July 23rd, or updated, sorry, July 23rd. So filings for weekly unemployment benefits rose for the first time in nearly 4 months as some states rolled back reopenings because of the coronavirus pandemic, a sign the jobs recovery could be faltering. Initial unemployment claims rose by a seasonally adjusted 109,000 to 1.4 million for the week ended July 18th, the Labor Department said Thursday, halting what had been a steady descent from a peak of 6.9 million in late March, when the pandemic and business closures shut down parts of the U.S. economy. So this is just something that I want to point out a few things here. So for one, this is, as they point out here, this is the first week in nearly 4 months that that the unemployment numbers increased. So that means that they have been steadily declining. And that means that every week was a new low. That means from the high point, from the peak, it had reached a new low from that peak every week, which means that if it only increased 110,000 essentially to get to 1.4 million, that means there were about 1.3 million claims made last week. And that was at the absolute lowest that it reached over the course of this pandemic since we started, since the first 6.9 million, since the peak of 6.9 million in late March. And so just to put that in context, at the peak of the Great Recession, the 2008, 2009 housing crash, the Great Recession, at its peak, the weekly unemployment claims number at its peak during the Great Recession was 625,000. In the previous peak of all time in history before the COVID-19 pandemic was 695,000 weekly claims. So what we're talking about here is on a magnitude of at least double what are the most in history. And so since we've been tracking this, and so the numbers that we're talking about, these are worse than what we've ever tracked, but we didn't track during the Great Depression. And so but economists like Richard Wolff have said that this is far worse than what happened in the Great Depression, simply because it's not that it just cut so deep, but it cut so fast. And so what took about 3 years of job loss in the Great Depression happened over the course of about 3 weeks during the COVID pandemic. So that's one thing that definitely needs to be highlighted there. And just the fact that just these are staggering numbers we're talking about. We're talking about 1.4 million new claims for unemployment at the same time, in the same week that our Congress has just let the CARES Act lapse, and now the $600 a week federal pandemic unemployment compensation has run out as of, for every state except for New York. It was Saturday, July 25th, and every state in New York State was Sunday, July 26th. So since then, now that $600 a week compensation has run out. There were over 20, I think they said about 25.6 million people that are going to have that benefit be running out starting next week, and that's $2,400 less a month for at least that's almost 10% of the country there, 30 million people nearly. So you're probably talking about one in every four families being impacted by that, and just having their income go off of a cliff. It's just going to fall off of an economic cliff there. You're suddenly making $600 a week less, and what they're talking about replacing this with is a joke. And I'll get more into the stimulus package. I intend to do an entire episode where we kind of dig into just all the recent news that has come out about the stimulus package. I think that that'll be our next episode, hopefully tomorrow. And so we'll dig more into the stimulus package and really try to pick it apart a little bit more and just highlight how uniquely terrible this and insufficient, woefully insufficient, this economic stimulus package that is being right now proposed by Republicans. What the Democrats had already proposed, and I believe what they called the HEROES Act, was already woefully insufficient. But this is spitting in the face of workers everywhere, small businesses, and it even, I mean, they are talking about Mitch McConnell's trying to sneak in something called the Trust Act into this that would gut Social Security and Medicaid. So we're now leveraging our retirements for a little bit of short-term security here. And so this is absurd. And by the time you retire, it's too late. You're older. You just don't have the energy to be fighting like this, and you're already, into the system and on a fixed income. So things get a lot harder then. So this was just something that was really striking. Wanted to call attention to this, make sure that we're paying attention to this. The unemployment we are at Great Depression levels beyond Great Depression levels of unemployment. And what we need is a massive stimulus. And look at what the response to the Great Depression was. It was FDR policies. It was FDR enacting the most progressive policies and the most radical policy changes that this country may have ever seen since its inception. In the shortest period of time, you had Social Security, a jobs insurance for the first time, the what's it called, the military, the GI Bill that allowed the veterans to go to school for essentially free. So there were all kinds of social programs implemented in order to, and there was a massive amount of government spending used to offset the Great Depression. And then you had, the World War II, and we had to further, enact greater social programs in order in greater government spending. We had to really ramp up government spending in order to offset the loss of productivity for the country and doing something like going to war or fighting a pandemic. So the fact that we're not stimulating the economy properly right now, and that we're sitting here giving handouts, worrying about handouts and corporate liability at the same time, that tens of millions of Americans are unemployed and unable to find work because those jobs the permanent job loss is increasing. Temporary, at the beginning of this pandemic, there were a lot more temporary jobs being lost than permanent job loss, but the permanent job loss has been increasing slowly over time. And so what that means is that in the beginning of the pandemic, it seemed like, okay, most of these job losses are going to be temporary and we'll be going back to these jobs. But as this pandemic has waged on, it's been, the job loss is now shown to be permanent job loss, and these jobs have been proven to not be coming back, mostly because, well, for one, obviously the restrictions, there are lots of restrictions in place, but then also 70% of our economy is consumer spending, and people don't have, are about to run out of, have $2,400 less a month to spend, and people have been sort of having to tighten up a bit. Now, of course, because of that $600 a week payment, that was acting as a stimulant to the economy. And it was one of the only things propping up the real economy. Now, the Fed is injecting trillions of was at one point injecting trillions of dollars per day, but they've injected trillions of dollars into the stock market, and they're artificially propping up that sector of the economy. But the real economy is being largely held intact by this $600 a week federal pandemic unemployment compensation, because that's the money that people have to spend to still buy from local restaurants that are operating at, in this limited capacity, and you're trying to spend on local stores, local restaurants. And so the only way to keep that going is to keep these payments going. And what we really need at this stage is so let's just dig a little bit into this really quickly. But the Republicans' big issue with this is that there is and for anyone that hasn't already, please do me a favor, like and subscribe. If you haven't already, please click the like button below. Just smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. Also, you'll find a link in the description to my Patreon. If you can afford it, please do me a favor and support the channel. Help us grow, help us keep the lights on by just donating a couple bucks on Patreon every month. So would really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Okay, so just getting back to it, with this bill that they're proposing, this is just what they're offering us is insufficient because of the fact that we rely so heavily on this in this country on consumer spending. We really do need we rely on people having money, everyday people having the disposable income. And so what they're talking about doing is dropping that down from $600 a week to something like 70% of people's income, which is likely to end up being something like on average around $200 a week. So you're talking about $400 a week less. That's $1,600 less a month. That's a lot of spending money. That's a lot of money. That dollar, they have this economic measure of something, they call it like the multiplier effect of your dollar. What's the multiplier effect of your dollar? So like $1 for a poor working class person has it ends up getting spent back into the economy like 2 to 3 times at least, where $1 to a wealthy person, it doesn't get circulated into the economy, annually at all, because they're just putting it into a bank somewhere, stashing it away, and it's not getting touched. And so that money's not actually going back into our economy. So it's much more of a stimulating effect when you put money in the hands of working people. And the way that you do that, because right now what the Republicans are saying is, oh no, it's so terrible. I mean, literally Mitch McConnell, who was it that came out and said this recently, that Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of the Treasury, said, we can't, the taxpayers aren't going to pay people to sit at home than they were making at work. Well, why not? The taxpayers are the people that are paying themselves. This is us. They're the people that are sitting at home, not able to work. And so their whole issue is that oh no, we can't pay people more money to stay at home than they would be making to work. Well, there's a real simple solution to that. And it doesn't require a huge bureaucracy to be created where you have to sit there and, prove your poverty to some institution and show them all, how much money you're making, and then have them calculate out 70% of that amount, and all that sort of bureaucracy that gets created. Real simple solution is to create a universal basic income. That's the solution. It's quick, it's straightforward. We can do it using debit cards like Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib from Michigan. She suggested, and I think even proposed, Pramila Jayapal, I believe, and her had a bill together. So I believe Pramila Jayapal and Rashida Tlaib both had proposed doing universal basic income using debit cards that would be issued to everyone. And the government could just easily, the IRS or whoever it is, I believe it's the IRS, or can issue the same way that they issue these stimulus payments. The $1,200, the IRS issues the $1,200 one-time payment. Instead of these one-time payments, they could be offering a monthly, $2,000 instead of one time $1,200. They could be giving us a $2,000 a month to every single person 16 and older in the country, and then do another, like, say, $1,000 per month for every dependent that somebody has. Maybe 2,000. Honestly, I would love that if it were $2,000 a month for every dependent that you have, but at least $1,000 more for every dependent you have. And so that's the solution. And then why is that a better solution than all of this garbage that they're coming up with? Because it solves that problem too. If the issue is, oh, well, people are making more money staying at home than they are working. Well, if everybody's getting this amount of money, this universal basic income, regardless of whether they're at home or working, then that means that if you go to work, then you will be paid your wage on top of this universal basic income. And so it just, it makes too much sense, and that's why we know policies like this will never pass. Other countries all over the world have been doing this. In Germany, they just did a payroll replacement program where they just said, listen, don't fire people. If you don't fire anyone on your payroll, if you don't fire anyone on your payroll, then we will replace all of your wages, like 80 to 90% of them. I think it's like 80 plus percent of them. The government will do direct wage replacement for that, and they will cover 80% of your payroll. And what that does is it makes it so that so the difference is, at the beginning of this, the US had something like 5% unemployment, and at its peak, and right now we're over 20%. Real unemployment is likely over 20%, and at the very least, it's reached 15 to 17% reported officially at its peak, and so we went from 5 to over 15% unemployment in the US, while Germany went from 5% at the beginning of COVID-19 to 6% right now. So they've barely registered an increase in their unemployment, and that was because the government stepped in and protected payrolls and just essentially provided all of those people with a basic income for that time. And some countries did. I saw some countries doing over $3,000 monthly. I think Canada was like $2,800 a month. I saw some that went up to, like, the max was like over $7,000 a month in some places. I think those were in the Scandinavian countries. So just a thing, just something to note and keep an eye on. So thanks for watching Radical Democracy Podcast. I'm your host, Kamali Rose. Please like and share this video, subscribe to the channel, and if it doesn't bother you, hit that bell below to receive notifications whenever we go live or launch a new video. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you can afford it, do me a huge favor and head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/radicaldemocracy and throw me a few bucks. Whatever you can afford, it goes a long way, and I will greatly appreciate it. It helps the channel to continue to exist and to grow, and I really appreciate the support. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon. All right. Peace. All right, that was a good one. That one's it.